This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of
You can get the TrueFire All Access Pass for as cheap as they ever do it, the $99 thing. So just jump and do that if you're looking for the best price that you can get TrueFire All Access for. You might have seen a couple of these videos that I've done in the past talking about some of, I guess, our guitar heroes, and maybe Yngwie Malmsteen might not be one of your guitar heroes, but I certainly respect the shit out of his playing. Sorry, I swore. Anyway, so I've done videos talking about like John Mayer and Keith Urban. There was a conversation that was had when they were watching a guy playing live, and they just said that you could tell this guy really knows that guitar, and it kind of led to this kind of point that they were making, that having fewer guitars or just having like one main guitar can really be a thing which helps to increase the bond between the player and that guitar. And I kind of concluded from this that I might like to have fewer guitars, and I kind of whittled down my collection to like maybe 12 guitars or something like that is what I actually have that I consider mine. There are other guitars that are here on loan from companies and stuff like that, but I did see this come up because I think it's kind of interesting to hear like people talk about their philosophy on this stuff. And Yngwie Malmsteen has hundreds of instruments that he keeps in his studio. They're in my studio, they're all over the place, they're mostly in the studio where I record. I use maybe 2 or 3 of them. Most of the guitars that I use live are Yngwie Malmsteen signature models. There was a time when I was collecting. I don't really collect them anymore, I just have a bunch of them. And I think it's a really interesting idea. But there are some other points where I've noticed and read that he kind of numbers his instruments, and I kind of thought this would be kind of an interesting thing to talk about. Yngwie does have a March 54 Strat. The first year they ever made. They made 8 guitars that month apparently, and he's got one of them. So there's a Strat on the cover of his first record which he wouldn't sell, but he said, I don't play it myself, but it seems to be very valuable to other people. So I guess he's just collecting that essentially. When I was younger, I used to get really kind of like, I'd have one guitar and number it 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5 that would be like touring and recording guitars, and they had to do the solos with this one, the rhythm tracks with that one, and I felt uncomfortable with that. So I decided I'm not doing anymore. I'm just using factory guitars. That's it. So basically when my tech gives me a guitar, I don't even know which one I'm playing. I don't even know. let's say, God forbid, something happens to guitar, you can never get over it. Oh, I can't play because it's not that guitar. I used to be like that years ago. Now I'm just like, hey, give me a Strat, that's it. So I do think even Yngwie is kind of sort of morphed in this case from having like a collection and being really like, it has to be this, this and this, to a point where he's like actually doesn't want to be dependent on that anymore. And I think maybe this does run a little bit counter to this idea of being really wedded to one instrument, because as he says, God forbid something happens to it. And, you know, I can think of a few stories like this, like Eric Johnson with his Virginia Strat, where that was his number one. The story goes that it fell off a stand and was never quite the same after that. I guess Eric Johnson got over it eventually, right? And like, he seems to be fine playing other stuff. There are other stories out there a little bit like that of guitars that have ended up being lost or stolen, right? I'm sure you can think of some of them. I can't right now. Anyway, but then I do still think that there is like a utilitarian argument for kind of sticking to one guitar, you know, as much as possible, because you kind of get to know the guitar better. I still think that's the case, and obviously like Yngwie doesn't need too much help in that regard, right? Like an amazing player, and like he's come from that point of view, like I don't want to be in that kind of comfort blanket state that Andy Timmons was talking about, where he's played like the same guitar for 30 years, like the exact same guitar, the Ibanez AT prototype, that's been his number one, had many refrets. I guess I get kind of both sides of the argument, and so that's why I'm going to go out and buy 15 more Strats. That's how I'm justifying that. But no, seriously, I think Yngwie's obviously in a position where he's got a studio to keep all of this stuff. But it's kind of an interesting, I thought, another angle to this, where it's like, well, maybe being completely like obsessed with one guitar in general and getting overly anal about it is not the best thing either. Because what happens, you know, once this needs a refret, I'm going to have to not play it for a couple of weeks. So yeah, I do have another Strat which I would put up there with this one, the yellow K-line. That one's with Charlie Allen at the moment. But so I do have like a fallback Strat that I could play. I generally don't tend to gig this one live particularly anyway, just because I don't want something to happen to it. And in some cases, I think that's okay, right? But yeah, this idea that if you were on tour, would you take your favourite instruments with you anyway, or your most valuable ones? To me, I think in that case, I'd be a bit more like pragmatic about it. Like if it's going on an airline, you see horror stories about stuff happening on airlines and stuff like that as well. I think I would just take a production guitar. Like if I had a signature guitar, I don't. Something off the shelf in that way would be a good bet. I think John Mayer has also talked about the goal of making something number one, so he's occasionally given away his number one guitar apparently, and then you start like the process of bedding another guitar into your kind of thing, and he talked about that as being like a process over time and bonding with the guitar, which is kind of interesting too. But do you side with Yngwie, or do you side with Andy, John Mayer and Keith Urban? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And I guess this is also a question for you guys, because I'm presuming you're somewhat like me in that you might have like 5, 6, 7 guitars. Do you find yourself playing one or two more than any of the others? Like, do you have shelf queen guitars? I'd love to know your thoughts on that. Cheers.